Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are located, what time it is there. My name is Mervi Lamminen. I am the CEO and the founder of Onti Solutions, and we are happy to be here to discuss about imposter syndrome today. I have a great pleasure to have Mari Järvinen here. Hello, Mari.
Hello, Mervi. Thank you for having me.
And Rocío Perez. Good morning or good evening.
Good morning, 1 a.m. Yes, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here as well.
Definitely. Just a couple of words before we get started. Onti is a company helping people to prevent burnout and to feel better at work. And this is why we are interested in such topics as imposter syndrome. And today, I would like you guys to send us questions so we can answer them. There's 45 minutes we are spending together this morning. It would be nice to hear your thoughts and your questions, and we are more than happy to answer them throughout the 45 minutes. So you can see the question tab there in the screen. You will be receiving a recording afterwards. So if you have to leave or if you want to check something out later, that's going to be possible. You will receive it in email during tomorrow. Now let's get started. I would like to hear introductions first. How about Mari, if you start? Who are you and where are you coming from?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mari Järvinen and I am from Finland originally, but I live in Amsterdam. My background is in organizational psychology and kind of a generalist in organizational psychology. So I in my work, I deal with everything that has to do with individuals, teams, leaders, organizations, and the dynamics in organizations. And so a very broad scope on people and work, basically. And as one of my jobs or one of my companies that I work with Onti and help coach people through their packages and also do these webinars and trainings. So I'm happy to be here to talk about this important topic today.
Wonderful.
Happy to have you here. And Rocío.
My name is Rocío Perez. I'm an author, speaker, trainer, founder of Inventiva, the Mindshift Game, and Unstoppable. And I love working with individuals and have been for over the last 25 years to help them break through to that next level and achieve the life that they love and desire. I work with individuals, families, and corporations.
Thank you. And let's get started. So first, how would you describe what are we talking about when we are talking about imposter syndrome? Rocío, would you like to start?
Most definitely, and I would love Mari to follow that up as well. Imposter syndrome is really something that we experience, and I'd say that the vast majority of individuals at one point in their life experience feeling like an imposter. It looks very different for every individual. Maybe it feels like we're not good enough, things aren't working out for us. We feel like an outsider, even though we may have the time, the energy, the money, the resources, the education, the everything that's important. And there may be a time in life, whether that's something that happens at work or even in family, we have a loss of a family member, an illness, things may happen and we start to feel like an imposter. There's a loss of power, there's a loss of connection. And I'd love Mari to describe it more from your background and your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So first of all, I'd like to point out that this is not a mental illness, although it is called a syndrome, but that is just it's a collection of phenomena that happens. And like you said, many people suffer from this and experience it in at some point in their lives. So anybody can have imposter syndrome. Anybody can kind of have it at some point and then not have it again. So it's something that can come and go, and it can be more, or it can be more stable. So basically what it is this feeling of that soon everybody's going to find out that I don't really deserve what I have, or I shouldn't really be where I am, or I'm not cut out for what I'm doing or the position I'm in, or I can't do the thing that I want to do because I don't have the skill set, or I'm not good enough for, or not deserving of whatever it is that I would like to do, or where I am actually. So often it comes out as these thoughts thinking like it's, oh, where I got is not me. It's due to luck or connections or just feeling like a fraud, basically, but not a mental illness. So that's important to remember.
I think that's one of the fascinating things, having been someone who's experienced it a number of different times in my career, where I had individuals who say, Rocío, you've achieved great success. You know, you're on TV, you're on the radio, you're on here, there, and everywhere. And I felt like an imposter. I felt like there wasn't enough education that I can go after. I wanted to get more educated. I wanted to get more degrees. I wanted to get more certifications, all these different things. It wasn't ever enough. And discovering that, being able to take a step back. And it wasn't until about a decade ago, I was at a conference and they had an exercise to identify just this, you know, are we feeling worthy of that success? And I remember we're walking around saying nice things about people, really acknowledging them. And you would have thought that I was going to get the prize, because I never let anyone acknowledge me for anything at all. The words didn't even come out of their mouth fast enough before I acknowledged them. And really what I realized, I said, wow, I'm putting up everyone on a pedestal, thinking that they have achieved far greater than I have. And I was feeling less than. Right? That comes from that. What does it look like for each of us? Some of us may be Superman or Wonder Woman or whatever that may be for us, because it shows it very differently. And I know you can share that in just a moment, Mari. Individuals may become workaholics because there's never enough that they can do, right? They may not even acknowledge their natural genius. They're like, it's too easy. It has to be hard, right? Or they may be staying late at work or not contributing, not raising their hands. And I know a lot of global organizations right now, that's one of their number one key things, is for people to bring creativity to the work. When we have roughly here in the United States, roughly about 78% of individuals don't feel psychologically safe to make a contribution, that really impacts the organization as a whole. And where do we go from here now? What is your experience on that, Mari?
Yeah, that's definitely a good description of how it works. Like everybody else around you seems to be so accomplished and so together, and then you yourself feel like, oh no, I don't have those skills. I'm not like that. I don't deserve this. And that's also a thing that comes from us knowing more about ourselves than we know about those other people, because probably many of them are also feeling the same way, like, oh, I shouldn't be here, but they're hiding it because that's not something that they want to show. They don't want to show that vulnerability, and that really comes from the psychological safety angle. Like if you don't feel like you can show those sides where you still feel like you're learning, or you're not there yet, or you haven't quite kind of figured out that you actually do deserve these things that you have, then that is often how you will feel. Like everybody else around you is so much better and so much smarter and more accomplished. And I see this a lot in my work as well. There's a client that I coached recently who she's an HR leader in a fairly big company, and she was talking about how she had designed this whole new project that she was going to launch. And in these coaching sessions, we talked about her feeling like, this can't be me, like I can't go and present this. And then we got to the bottom of why she was feeling like this. It was because she had come into the company as an assistant, like the very bottom of the tiers, you know, in the company. And then she had risen up and educated herself. She had gone to school while working and all these things. And then she was in this position of HR leader, but she was still feeling like that assistant who didn't really know what she was doing and really wasn't very accomplished at that time. So she needed to kind of get her mind up to speed on where she actually was and what she had accomplished. And it wasn't easy. So, and she was almost ready to just like, no, I'll let somebody else present this thing that I designed. And it was kind of a shame to think that she would let that go. But in the end, she got over it and did present it. So it worked out well. But yeah, same kinds of things I see in my work as well.
And it's fascinating, right? Because I've had the opportunity to ask the very same question to 3-time Olympic winners who say, yes, I feel like an imposter sometimes. And they have won 3 times over, and thinking, okay, And no one is not going to experience this at any time in life, right? You know, like we all do at one point or another, you know, whether it's been as children or we're right now in our professions or even in our families. Sometimes we feel like an imposter. I have individuals who say, hey, I don't feel like I belong in this family. I can't have conversation. I can't do this and I can't do that. And it's fascinating when we look at it. I've worked with individuals who make 70 million and lose it. When we get to the core of the core of the core, it's always that sense of worthiness. I don't feel worthy enough of having this success. And then we start to self-sabotage. What does self-sabotage look like? It looks like everything is happening outside of me and nothing's happening inside of me, yet everything is happening inside of me. The outside is just a reflection of what is in the inside, how I'm feeling. And it may look like, well, maybe the suppliers didn't come in on time. Maybe the prices didn't go, or maybe whatever that may be is only a symptom of it, right? It's something that happened, it's already there. How do we deal with it in the future when we get into those moments? Because again, it happens to all of us. And I remember there was moments for myself in my career when I had my first top management job, thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, these people have been waiting for these opportunities. They've been there 13 plus years. And all of a sudden I come in and I leapfrog them straight out of university. What am I doing?
Yeah, well, that's definitely a situation where it would happen. Like you probably aren't the most experienced there. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be there, but that's definitely a situation where that, you know, the way you talk to each other or to yourself inside your head can become kind of your own detriment. So this is also what I really see, that it's the way we speak to ourselves, like that internalized speech, wherever it comes from. It could be that it comes from our childhood. If we were only praised for perfect results and not for trying or not for learning, or if we were that way in school, if our school environment was only focused on what we know, not what we're learning, or whatever it is. Or if you're in an environment where actually your accomplishments aren't valued as much as someone else's, like if there can be discrimination, there can be still these gender differences, or if you're a minority in a setting where you are, then there can actually be outside influences that tell you you're not as good as someone else. And then often that becomes our internal speech, like the way we talk to each other. We start believing that, and then we start telling ourselves that actually, yeah, you shouldn't be where you are. But that's something that we also need to work on to break that cycle of how we talk to ourselves. Or do you agree with your experience in how did you talk to yourself?
Most definitely. So what a great conversation right there. That alone, what is the internal conversation? And I always love to answer it in two ways. One, about me. I remember the day that I discovered I had led so many people for 16 and a half, almost 17 years, leading people, and they're having breakthroughs. And I felt like a fraud as a leader. How can these individuals, and I remember I found myself in my San Diego home looking at myself and saying, how can these people who are still calling me, I had just moved to San Diego that summer, why are they still calling me? And they're like, Rocío, I need your energy, help me, you know, boost me up, coach me, work with me. And I'm saying, it's not possible, right? They have everything that I want. And what I wanted was actually a relationship with my mother. That's what I wanted, right? Because the time, the energy, the money, the resources, the education, I had achieved a certain level of success. And I was looking for something that was not going to be fulfilled in the way that I thought it was supposed to be fulfilled. Right? It may look different. One of the things that I discovered after that process, going through that, I decided to put myself in through very intensive coaching. And I realized that there was messages that I was missing, that I hadn't heard. Maybe I heard them from others and I didn't let it land. I did not let or accept that statement for me. And I remember telling myself, I said, okay, if I need to go back and feed myself, feed my subconscious mind, that part of my own programming that reminds me that I'm amazing, because we have anywhere from 50,000 thoughts to 70,000 thoughts a day. Depending on the thoughts that we focus on, those thoughts can either be positive or negative. And if those thoughts are negative, guess where we're going? You know, everything grows in the dark. We can go downhill. And 80% of those same thoughts that we have every day are the same thoughts that we had yesterday and the day before and the day before. As a matter of fact, they're the same thoughts that grandma and grandpa had in addition to that. So one of the things that I discovered, I said, okay, I needed to hear, you're amazing. You're doing a great job. We love you. And I would walk around and say, hey, little girl, I love you. You're amazing. I think mirror and self-talk is probably one of the most powerful things that one can do for self, to feed self, because not everybody, you know, you and I can coach people over and over again, and we must be willing to do our own work. And that's what I discovered for myself. Okay, now it's time for the shoe to be on the other foot, and for me to look inside, in front of that mirror, look inside myself, look in front of that mirror and say, hey, you're amazing. Now, also to acknowledge the fact that, hey, I have accomplished a number of things in my life. What are the type of things that I have accomplished that I have not acknowledged? And I'm going to repeat that, because I know most of us are in that same boat. We have not acknowledged ourselves enough, right? Sometimes we're waiting for that external acknowledgement, yet that acknowledgement must come from the inside. How about we have, instead of a vision board, we have an inspiration board, and that being an accomplishment board. What have I accomplished in my life? And anytime that we're feeling down, take that board out and say, wow, look at me. I went on that trip. I really wanted to go on that trip. I made it happen. I obtained that degree. I made it happen, that certification, whatever it was there. And I'll share a story about self-talk as well, about my grandson. Emilio was going on 5 years old, a little over a year ago. And I would come over and he's crying and he wants to catch the ball, and he's catching the ball with his arms out. He's never going to catch it, right? And I remember going over one Sunday and he tries to catch it and he crosses his arms and he's not catching it. The next time around, I'm like, Emilio, let's go play ball. He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, come on, Emilio, let's go play ball. And then I start to throw the ball at him. He's like, I can't get it. I can't get it. And I said, what is this child telling himself? What is he telling himself? And I'm like, he's saying that he can't get it. What if I change the conversation right here, right now, and say, hey, Emilio, you've got this. I think we definitely can see that little guy who's now standing in front of me against a wall, and I'm like, Amelia, you've got this. And I said, repeat after me. I've got this. You've got this. Who's got this? You've got this. I've got this. And he's like, I've got this. And you can see Amelia. I have him on video. In that moment, I turned on the video camera and I'm like, okay, I want to see him. And he's like, I've got this. I've got this. I've got this. I throw the ball. Emilio catches the ball and he flies across the room. And he's like, I want to see. I want to see. I want to see. And what happened in that moment really changed him, because 98% of the balls after that he caught. And it is
wow, what a great story.
How do we talk with ourselves in such an important conversation? What are some other recommendations on your end, Mari, for people? What can they do in for themselves, and also even in a corporate environment? What does that look like?
Yeah, so many great things in that in those stories that I want to touch upon. First of all, like celebrating your successes, like you also said, like having this somehow documenting what you've done, where you've been, whether it's a journal or some kind of trip down memory lane with pictures or whatever it is, because what people tend to do is simplify the past and also simplify the future. But then in this moment, we have a lot more information about now than we can remember about the past. And then if you look back 10 years ago, haven't you learned a lot? Haven't you come far from wherever you were? But if you don't remember those, if you don't consciously give those things attention, where you moved forward, where you learned something, where you accomplished something, then those things often get lost in our kind of general memories of where we've been. So that would be something that I would recommend to do. Also, like really pay attention to those successes and that those good moments, because then often we tend to focus on what didn't go so well, or where we failed, or where we were disappointed in ourselves. So that's really one thing to do, kind of see where you've been and make those conscious effort to also look at the successes. And then the other thing, from your story with your grandson, what you tell yourself is so incredibly powerful, and not only in a personal setting, but also in a company setting. What you tell yourself you can do, you probably can. What you can't tell yourself you can't do, that's also probably something you will stop yourself from being able to do so. So trying to change that way we talk to each other, because if you think about it, if you have a colleague who succeeds or a colleague who doesn't do so well, how would you talk to them? Or a good friend? You would probably be friendly, and you would probably be encouraging, like, hey, try again. You know, this didn't go so well, but we can learn, and how can we move forward? Or just being kind of a gentle supporting force to others comes much more naturally to us than being that way to ourselves. So kind of being mindful of how you speak to yourself is very, very important. Also in a work setting, like how would you react to a colleague's mistake? Probably not so harsh, but then to yourself, you're usually very, very harsh, and thinking that it somehow describes you, that you didn't do so well in something. And then if you then also kind of ignore your successes, then that becomes a vicious cycle of imposter syndrome, because then you can't really do everything that you wanted to do. And this I see a lot. People not taking those next steps, not going for the big wins, not looking for that promotion, or going into these leadership positions like you also talked about, where you feel like you're in over your head, and that makes people avoid that as well. Is this also something that you see in leaders that you coach, that they don't fulfill their potential because they're scared?
Most definitely. And sometimes I see that also with women who say, oh, I can't do it. You know, I don't have the time. I don't have. Sometimes we look at it, and let's just be honest, when I've seen it, they have 99.9% of what it takes to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
That 0.01% is what they're panicking over. And I'm like, you've got this. You've got this, and you can do this. And I've seen individuals through self-talk, and I've seen individuals through mirror work walk out of a coaching session completely empowered. And sometimes we have those moments that we lose it. For instance, one of my clients who was amazing, she was on top of her world, and then she got cancer. And that completely changed everything. After going through an entire year plus with cancer, she was on the verge of divorce. Not only did she have cancer that she was healing from, she was on the verge of divorce. Her kids were out of control. Life was a disaster. She had lost her business, her status in the business, and now she had to start to rebuild. Coming in, I didn't even recognize who she was. That was night and day seeing her. Mm-hmm. Yet in 2 hours, she walked out like Wonder Woman. She was her body was erected, her eyes were bright. She owned her space. And to me, that's something that we must do our work every single day, because things happen slowly. We just didn't land there. It's not just, hey, you know, here we are, we woke up today and I feel like an imposter. There was little gradual things that happened over and over again until we arrived there. Here's the key. How do we shift that? How do we change that for ourselves right here, right now, and every single day? And that, I love the aspect that you talk about journaling. That's number one thing that our clients do and they work with, is that they journal every day until the unfamiliar becomes more familiar than the familiar. Then that's when we start to make that change. When I can accept what it means, here's plain and simple. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I accept my successes, and I accept my future successes now, right? Because if people be in that position, it's because they want me to be there. They see the potential. It's not because I'm here and I can do the work. I'll learn about the work. I have the skills. I have the leadership skills to be able to do what's important for me to do, and to be in discovery, or else we're always recreating. Because sometimes we go into jobs and we want to recreate everything. I don't know, I moved to Finland, I want to create my community, go to the same type of restaurants and music and whatever. How about I discover something completely different that I can really enjoy So make
Yeah.
the unfamiliar familiar.
Yeah, and this is also something that carries over. If you as a leader, if you're a senior person in an organization, if you start doing this, then you also become more familiar with, okay, so these are the things that I'm really good at, and these are the things where I'm still learning. And then if you actually voice that, that then helps your team as well. Like if you think about people who are new to a team or an organization or company, they have a lot of insecurities about what should I do, how should I be, do I know enough, am I able to do this? And a lot of people go into this hiding mode because they don't want to show those weaknesses, because nobody else there is showing their weaknesses either. But if somebody starts and it's like, hey, this is where I'm still on a learning path, then that becomes an okay thing to say. So this is a key part of also making the environment in an organization psychologically safe. Voicing those
I think
thoughts
that's
and being in a growth mindset instead of a kind of a fixed, you have to already be there.
And that's fascinating what you mentioned there. You know, how do we become that leader that does our own work on ourselves? Because we can't relate to others if we haven't done our own work. And we can all think of a situation, and if we can't, or we know somebody who's been through something like that, to have empathy in those moments. And it's easy to say as a leader, hey, you know, maybe this person's feeling like an imposter. How do we guide without even mentioning that, right? How do we have the conversations, and how do we be vulnerable? People can't get it until we're vulnerable ourselves. Sometimes we're so, I remember being so inauthentic. I'm like, I've got this, I'm superwoman, you know, nothing can break me. And I remember some people would come and it was like, Rocío, you're like, your life is perfect. Well, it seemed perfect at times, and there was moments that I felt like an imposter. I remember walking into an event that there was no tickets, high level national conference. I'm in LA, I'm all excited. People are gifting me tickets to all these events that I had no access to. And there was one particular event that there's no access to the event. I walked by the door, my friends are like, hey, I'm gonna let you in, go in. And I'm walking in there, I'm like all excited. I'm going to go to this elite room, meet all these people for lunch. And then I stopped right around my table and I said, well, not anyone can get in here, can they? And in that moment, I felt like an imposter. So I immediately found the seat and I sat in there. And then I was scared for a moment. I'm like, no, Rocío, you deserve to be here. To me, it's like own that room, to have that conversation. The moment that something comes up like that, to remember, to have our own process, whether it's a set of sticky notes or maybe I have my phone with me that can remind me, where I have my accomplishment list that I can read it over and over again when I'm feeling like that, and to go connect with our tribe. Go find your tribe. Go find those people of supporters. Hey, Money, I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling like an imposter. This is what happened. Help me out. Not for you to dwell upon it, right? Because that's not what you're there for. You're there to help me see my own greatness and for me to snap out of it as fast as I can, because we can be there for a long time. And time to ask for help. Sometimes we're not vulnerable enough to voice that, yes, I'm feeling like an imposter. Yes, I don't feel like I have the tools. And there are people who want to help us. Like, wow, if you would have told me that three months ago or 3 years ago, I would have helped you.
Yeah, but voicing that, it's not easy. And so we did the same talk yesterday, and or similar talk, same topic anyway. And there was a really good questions like, how can I help someone if I notice someone in my team having imposter syndrome? How can I help them? And that's a really, really good question, because like you said, it's probably not a good idea to go and say like, hey, you look like you're having imposter syndrome, because that can be like too much to take in. But it's more about having that kind of a coaching conversation, giving that person the space to be there, to be vulnerable, to say that they're learning, and ask what they're learning, what they want to learn, how you could support them. And then also making sure that in your team there's enough feedback and also praise, because we often forget to praise people for the good things that happen, especially in Finland. I know it's a, even in a restaurant, many times when I've given good feedback in a restaurant, if I say to a waitress or a waiter, like, hey, I'd like to give some feedback, they go completely blank, like, oh, what's wrong? Because that's our assumption that feedback is bad. So kind of learning that culture of giving feedback so that people have a backdrop to kind of So how do I know if I'm good enough? How do I know if I did well enough? Because a lot of times when we are new in a job or even in the workforce, we don't have that perspective yet. How would I know if I've done well enough if nobody tells me? Of course, I can have that internal speech, and that's the most important part, but I need some clues. I need something to help me understand that as well. So that's something that you can also build up in your teams and your companies, that making sure that people get the praise that they deserve, and if you do a good job, that you get the feedback for that as well, and not just for the things that went wrong, because then we can start collecting those points of reference, like, oh yeah, I did do that well.
I love considering that, right? I love to be the welcome wagon. And I can almost guarantee if there's somebody that moved to Denver who friends know, and they're like, okay, you must meet Rocío. Like, I want you to have a conversation with her. I love to be that welcome wagon. I like to be that welcoming person to say, hey, how can I support you? One of the things that I've discovered in my career is that actually helps me even more, right? It helps me build relationships. It helps me build confidence. It helps me take courageous actions. It helps me to be that connector. There's so many different benefits from doing so. And here's something that's fascinating. When we're encouraging somebody else in ways that they can actually hear it. So I would invite people to look at, how do I provide feedback in ways that people can hear it? How do I provide feedback or even coaching in a way that people can actually hear it? And how do I be vulnerable enough to share my story first and foremost? Because I truly believe that we can create relatability within 30 minutes. Having conversation with somebody within 30 minutes, I can get into their world. Or I can do it the long way, and it may take 1, 2, 3 years. I was a president for a national organization. Here's a great example. People on my board of directors didn't even know that I had a child, right? We hadn't created relatability. They knew nothing. I had been working with them for 2 years on important topics that impacted our communities across the nation. And here I was, no relatability. What is that connection? What is that authenticity? And if we're seeing somebody that's suffering from something specifically, in whether it's related to imposter syndrome, how do we provide thoughts and insights that are going to help them right here, right now? How can I share through my own story, or share through a story, like something that I've had to overcome, not necessarily that it's going to be exactly what that person's overcoming, until they can see themselves in my shoes and say, wow, Mari and Rocío are human, right? And they feel like an imposter, or they've failed and they've gotten up and tried over and over again, and here's where they're at today. That's the magic of it.
Yeah, for sure. And creating that environment is so incredibly important. And like we talked about in the beginning, of course, it's a lot about the way you talk to yourself, the way you build up your own kind of identity, and being like a whole person, regardless of what other people think. But still, we are human beings. We live with these connections. We need connections, and kind of, if you can help someone else also build up that image of themselves in a different way than they have before, then that's really, really valuable. But then going back to yourself, thinking about, like, what kind of feedback do I take in as well? If somebody gives me good feedback, do I brush it off and it's like, that was nothing, that was just, luck, or that person did most of the work, or, what do we say to ourselves when we get positive feedback is also very, very powerful. And the story we tell ourselves is really the key, that at least I would like people to take away from this talk. Like, how do you talk to yourself? Do you talk to yourself in a critical way, or do you talk to yourself in an uplifting, or building yourself kind of way, so that you can become, kind of find that core who you are, that's not affected by whatever someone else might think, because then maybe the next new thing you go into, it doesn't really matter what people think, because you already know that you're good enough, and you're enough, just in general.
That
Have you seen that in your clients, for example?
Definitely, and that being enough, thank you. being enough in general, most people are walking around saying, hey, am I enough? Am I enough? Is this enough? Am I doing enough? Am I good enough? And when we discover at the end of the day, we are great, we're extraordinary where we're at, because that's where we're at, right? We have that privilege to be there. We've earned the right. And now it's time to go ahead and own our greatness. And I think that's one of the greatest things. I would say that 9 out of 10 people are unstoppable, and they don't own it. Right? They don't own it, right? You see that one person who's owning it and they're feeling unstoppable, yet sometimes we have more knowledge or experience. Sometimes, how many times have you been around the table? And I know I have, and I hear this from my clients all over the world, saying, hey, I want to raise my hand, and I don't say anything. And I don't say, and then somebody else, for however long I've been in that, there was one particular organization that I didn't want to raise my hand. And when I started raising it, and it would take me too long. And I'm like, no, I was about to say that. And there's 5 or 10 people who voice the same thing, and now they're heroes. And I'm like, if only I would have spoken up, right? If only I would have said that. And how do I own all of that and say, okay, I forgive myself for that? How do I start fresh here now to take that courageous muscle and use it? Because courage could only be developed as we continue to take it, right? And confidence only is developed through courageous actions. How do we take those courageous actions right here, right now, to continue to move forward? We have a question here, Mari, in the chat. If you were to become the opposite of the imposter, someone who's thinking highly of themselves, does that matter? That's fascinating, right? Because sometimes it's also imposter. Would you agree, Mari? That we're showing off, and it may sound like somebody who's, oh, I know that, I got that, let me show you. Yet in the inside, they're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And we've all had conversations that we've been there, or we had conversations with individuals who don't think that they have anything to contribute, and then the opposite of it, like, I know it all. It's impossible. No one knows it all.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, there are people who seem like they know everything, and they could never be suffering from imposter syndrome. But I totally agree. I think most of the time it's a defensive mechanism. We want to hide those weaknesses because it's just humanly not possible to know everything, and it's just, you can't know everything, you can't be good at everything, you can't be perfect in that way. So if you're not showing any flaws, it's probably a hoax. So don't at least don't believe that those people are so amazingly excellent that they don't have any weaknesses or vulnerabilities at all. And we can't really change those people. Maybe they'll realize at some point that it would be good to kind of be there as a whole self instead of trying to put on this perfect persona that's not real. But I guess all we can do is, if we meet people like that, is just to work on our own thoughts regarding that. It's like, yeah, okay, so they're on their journey to finding maybe the other sides of themselves, and they haven't realized what they don't know yet, and that's okay. They'll find out at some point, and then they'll come to terms with that, and just kind of leave them to be what they are at this point.
Right, and that's such a fascinating thing right there. I've had the experience where I've been planning presentations with national leaders, and all of a sudden we're in Denver and they're like, I can't present. And to me, that becomes a bit of a shock. And of course, always be ready to present in any different circumstance. I've been left on the stage by myself, where I have 2 people who are extraordinary leaders, way beyond my capacity, who feel like an imposter on the spot. And now I have to take over an entire event, live event, on the spot. And be able to adjust on that. Even somebody who's an overachiever, like these amazing individuals, can feel like that. And is it every person that's an overachiever? Maybe not, right? The most important thing is that there are some overachievers that are wanting to be that Superman or that Wonder Woman and come up ahead. And what it sounds like, am I perfect enough? Am I good enough for you to accept me? Can you accept me for who I am, right? And that was me. At one point in my life, I made it from a 6th grade education into university. And I thought I was rocking it. And yet I continued to go after that next degree, that next certification, that next this, that next that. At one point, I had my entire wall full of certificates and diplomas, and it wasn't enough. It was not enough because it was never going to be enough until I learned to accept my achievements. And once we learn to accept our achievements and really acknowledge, I'm like, wow, you know, I've come a long way. And like you said earlier, we look at it at a span of 10 years, what we have accomplished in that period of time has been far more extraordinary than what we've even considered, even acknowledged. I bet we have that accomplishment board again, right? I'll mention that again. Put it on the wall. Look at the amazing. Every time you do something amazing, just put it on there.
Yeah. And I think also to the question of why are imposters often overachievers, I think, like you said, it's like not being enough is one of those thought patterns. But another thought pattern that often comes is it's like, where are my boundaries? Like, what do I need to do? And what is somebody else's job and responsibility actually? And that comes from really having that sense of self, like, all right, this is enough. I don't need to work 16 hours a day just because somebody else doesn't want to do this work. This is my job, and here's the boundary to other people's jobs, for example, and kind of trying too hard to please everyone just so that you'd be accepted in the workplace or wherever in your own mind. That's often a part of it as well. And going back to one of your thoughts that you said, like people not doing things that they could do that they should do. It really comes down to the bottom line of companies as well. Like if you have a lot of these people who don't go for those chances, don't strive for better results and are afraid to voice their opinions, aren't you losing money? Like in the end, like this is about like identity and feeling well and all that. But for companies, it really is kind of a shame to lose out on a lot of that potential, a lot of those talents that you hired for a reason because they're amazing. And if they're not saying anything, if they're not raising their hand in meetings, then that's too bad.
Right. And that's my experience too with a lot of our clients. They come in, they may be amazing engineers and they leave the job. So the story is always the same. Oh, they didn't treat me right. The communication wasn't there. I didn't feel like I was part of the group. Yet to hire an individual costs here in the States anywhere from $25,000 to upwards of $250,000 per individual, depending on the individual. What does that look like, right? The cost, the energy, the money, the resources, the goodwill to the company, clients, people who feel like they're left behind. And at the end of the day, I look at it as a family. We're a family here together, and what impacts me impacts you. And if you're not feeling like a rock star or amazing or feeling psychologically safe in your company and you're not making those contributions, there's an impact. There's an impact to the bottom line, and there's an impact to humanity. There's an impact to families. There's an impact even to my family, right? To all of our families inside of this organization. How do we move from here now?
Yeah, definitely. And I saw Merve came back, so we're almost out of time. But I just wanted to share this quote with you that I came across just recently by Dennis Waitley. It's not what you are that holds you back; it's what you think you're not. And I think that's something I'd like you to remember. Like if you don't think you can do it, you're probably right. But also, if you can, or if you think you can, you're probably also right.
And I would add to that, what a wonderful quote on that. Let's add to the fact that whatever we think is what we become. Whatever we think is what we become. And to also embrace all of our adversities into it. I am extraordinary because of my adversities and owning them, because sometimes we walk around, hopefully nobody finds me out, right? Hopefully nobody knows that I failed here, failed there. Embrace all of that. And Merve, right back over to you.
Definitely, we're talking about, of course, I think the biggest loss is on an individual level when people is not living up to his or her own expectations and capabilities. But we are also talking about a huge issue on a company level, on an organization level as well. We are coming to an end, as you guessed when you saw my face. Before we end, I would like to hear like one thing that you would give us a takeaway for our listeners. to when it comes to imposter syndrome? What is the one thing that for all of us that we should take into an account? Rocío, you first.
Thank you. I would say the number one thing is to do mirror work. Listen to your inner conversation. And if you're not hearing and you're not feeling good about yourself, go do it either way, right? Because there's something there that you can discover. And I promise you, within a very short period of time, as you do it religiously, you go through over and over again, there's going to be a point in time where you're just going to break through and you're going to feel amazing. People around you may be able to see it faster than what you can see it for yourself.
How about you, Mari?
Well, connecting to that, if you see someone in your surroundings, whether it's family or your team or just in your company in general, who you think is not really living up to their full potential, then go help them out. Try some coaching questions. Ask them where they'd like to be and what's holding them back, and kind of coach them to think about those things, and maybe give them some feedback on things that they've done well, and try to help them out on this journey, because they're probably feeling just as much of an imposter as you felt at some point. So you can just help someone else out also, not just yourself.
That's a lovely advice as well. Thank you, Mari. Thank you, Rocío. Thank you for all you who've been listening to us and taking the time to be here with us with this important issue. Hope you enjoyed and got some new ideas, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.